Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So, hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Fatigue Files podcast. And I am delighted to have with me today Ashok Gupta, the founder and CEO of the Gupta Program, which many of you will already be familiar with. And today, Ashok and I are going to have a conversation all around all things meditation. So, Ashok, one of the things that I'm really intrigued about in your program, I know, and in the other sort of connected work you do, it's all about the use of mindfulness and meditation. And it seems as though in your program, there's a very strong link between that and settling the autonomic nervous system.
Yes, thank you, Anna. I think most patients will notice when they have fatigue, they have chronic fatigue, long COVID, these types of illnesses, that there's a phenomenon that we call wired but tired. And that's quite common in this community, where you somehow notice that there's an overstimulation and at the same time there's fatigue. Now, how can those two things operate at the same time? Well, we believe that fatigue is being caused by an overstimulated autonomic nervous system, essentially the sympathetic nervous system, which is the ironic term for our stress system. And that then is producing all of the stress hormones, the cortisol, the excessive adrenaline and noradrenaline in the body, which then causes a lot of the downstream symptoms, in addition to the immune system being triggered. So meditation is an opportunity to calm the overall system down, the overall stimulation. And of course, there are many ways to do that. So people are talking about vagus nerve stimulation or vagus nerve exercises or embodiment practices, somatic experiencing, meditation. All of these things ultimately are taking someone from the busyness of the outside world to then becoming aware of their own bodies, grounding themselves in their own bodies and becoming more still. Because often when we have an overstimulated nervous system, we've lost that grounding. We're now out of our bodies, vibrating up here outside of our bodies. And that then means that the body itself is just continually overstimulated. So the purpose of breathing, meditation, calming techniques is all to bring us back into our bodies and begin to calm that autonomic nervous system. And in that way, we're wasting less energy, because the number one leakage of our energy is when we worry or there are unconscious emotions which have been unresolved. And there are many different therapies that can support the release of that to get us back to our natural state.
And very often, Ashok, isn't it true that when we're meditating, some of those things push up anyway? And actually, that's one of the challenges, I think, for some people meditating, is the way in which those energies start to move up can feel quite uncomfortable and for some people quite dysregulating in itself. And I've heard many people say that concentrating on the breath, for example, for them triggers anxiety. So I'm just wondering kind of which various meditation approaches you would say would be most effective for people who are highly activated, highly dysregulated, maybe suffering from various repressed traumas that start to be contacted the minute they settle down.
Yes. Analogy I use that helps a lot of our patients is the analogy of the pressure cooker. So imagine all of your life, every time you've worried or experienced right through to trauma, right through to situations that haven't been resolved, it's a bit more heat that goes into this pressure cooker. And it cooks and cooks and cooks, and it's very tense and very tight. The lid is very tight. And so when we first meditate, it's like releasing the pressure valve at the top. We all believe we're going to suddenly meditate and be in this blissful state. But actually, in order to access that, the water in the pressure cooker needs to be calm. But instead, there's a lot of pressure. So we're often meditating and we think, all I'm doing is having negative thoughts, or I'm getting just a rush of anxiety coming up. And that's all I'm experiencing. That is perfectly natural as we release sometimes lifetimes, if not, years of pent up emotions which haven't been released. Now, many of our clients are able to run the gauntlet and just bear with it, and gradually it gets easier as you release most of the pressure from the pressure cooker. Others, as you say, cannot do that because it's just too anxiety provoking to start off with. So we have some other meditations which actually are much easier for patients to use. And they are less meditations and more guided visualizations, where you're guiding the mind in a particular direction, and as a byproduct, there is relaxation, versus relaxation coming from the spaces of stillness. And therefore, that is another way that people can relax their nervous system. So we do provide for that as well in the program.
And actually, Ashok, that sounds much more like hypnosis, actually. Michael Yatko's book on mindfulness and hypnosis, he talks quite a lot in there about the very clear overlap between guided meditation and mindfulness and hypnotic experience, because obviously in hypnosis you guide the mind to particular objects of focus, which induces then with suggestions particular states, which are very similar, to saying, focus on that image of a lotus, imagine then that the petals are opening, and as they open your body comes into a deeply calm state, sort of that sort of thing. The more challenging distinction, isn't there, for me, is between open awareness type practices and the more hypnotic and guided mindfulness type practices, because the open awareness practices seem to be just bare attention to what arises in the field of awareness itself. Now, that can be much more challenging, and I think it can also be much more liberating potentially.
Yes, and that is the main difference between these hypnotic and visualization type techniques versus meditation. That, as you say, guided imagery or whatever, what it's doing is ultimately giving your mind something to think about, something to focus on. But even in meditation, ultimately, that guides you and leads you to the spaces. So certainly in our meditations, we start guiding people through kind of somatic embodiment almost, and then eventually leaving larger and larger gaps of space for people to be in that space of awareness. Now, if we have a lot of pent-up anxiety, those spaces of awareness are just the mind's opportunity to throw up all the things which are unresolved over our years. And therefore, in those moments, as you say, that continuing with the visualization might be better for those types of patients. Now, once you are in that particular state where it's an open awareness, the opportunity there is the training that then comes from that, because all of this is training the mind. It's a first piece of the jigsaw puzzle of brain retraining or neuroplasticity, which is normally the brain is continually stimulated and continually reactive. So it's reacting to our own internal thoughts and emotions, and it's reacting to the external world. But suddenly, in these spaces, there are still things happening. We're hearing sounds, we're aware of our bodies or aware of our symptoms, but we are now able to be in that open space of just pure awareness eventually. And that is training the mind to no longer be reactive and responsive to the stimuli around us. So that when we are then in the normal world, so we haven't got our eyes closed anymore and we're engaging with the world, the mind has been trained that just because you hear a loud noise or just because you detect a symptom in your body, that does not require a reaction, but simple witnessing observation of it from a neutral state. So that's why I say to patients, the meditation is not about the experience of meditation itself, although that can be lovely. It is the training course of the mind. And so it's like when you first go to the gym, if someone went to the gym for the very first time and started putting all the weights and whatever, it's effort. It's effortful. Yeah, it can be painful sometimes. You can feel worse afterwards. And you're thinking, hey, someone said I'm going to go to the gym and it's going to feel great. And I feel awful. But you have to run the gauntlet for a number of weeks for your body to get used, to be trained, the muscles to be trained to be able to handle the activity, the cardio, the weights. And then you begin to enjoy the exercise and the endorphins start coming, etc., etc. But it may not be straight away. And so it is with meditation. It is that commitment to knowing this is good for you that eventually good things may come further down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of meditation as being a training wheel as well for spiritual evolution. I mean, the changed relationship with the mind itself. So the mind becomes a phenomenon in front of awareness, in front of consciousness. the body becomes a phenomenon in front of consciousness, although the body is, of course, the living portal to the awareness itself. It's a really fascinating thing that I feel as you get more and more experienced as a meditator, the mind can be, obviously we get those experiences sometimes when the difference between meditating and dropping into meditation. Sometimes meditation just happens, everything stills, everything becomes clear. There's an incredible sense of just alive beingness, this profound inner stillness that comes almost spontaneously. And I think that's what people think they're going to get. That's what they think they're pursuing when they meditate. Whereas actually meditating is actually a more active thing than when those things happen. But the capacity to then increasingly allow and relax with more and more difficult material that starts emerging in the process of meditation, there's a real expansion there, isn't there, Ashok, in the capacity of the self to relinquish, I guess, what the Hindus call the samskaras, the patterns, the reactivities, the entrenched things, and sometimes they're generational epigenetic patterns almost. The journey just gets deeper and deeper, but the fundamental core of it is this radically changed relationship with all that, with our own experience, where we are, in fact, the expansive awareness, the consciousness itself, that in which the kind of world, mind, heart, body arises phenomena.
Yes, and I totally agree with what you've said there. This phenomenon is almost like, when people say, where is the soul? Where does the soul housed? And people say, oh, it's in the heart, or it's here, or it's here. And actually, we completely reverse it and say, as you've mentioned, the body and mind are housed within the soul. The soul is the bubble, which doesn't actually have a discrete end. It's just a bubble or a focus of energy within which is housed the mind and the body. And therefore, it's all about identification. So we traditionally, during our day, will identify with the mind, will identify with our bodies. So when things we call bad happen to the mind or body, then we experience distress and we become more identified with the mind and body. The purpose of meditation, or one of the purposes, is to have insights where we're able to observe, oh, I'm not the mind or body, but I can see what the mind is doing now. I can see what the body is doing now. But if I react to that, I've jumped back into my mind. But if I'm able to witness it with a cheerful, neutral attitude, then I'm no longer identified with it. And if I'm no longer identified with it, the fire will burn out. So this is what we say to our patients is, you've got this anxiety fire going on. And each time you react to your anxiety and feel your anxiety and think, oh my God, I'm anxious, this is awful, you fuel and add more wood to that fire. But if you're able to, over time, just neutrally observe it, the anxiety itself would burn out because it no longer is being fueled. Anxiety has to be fueled in some shape or form. And so it is that disidentification from the mind, being the field of awareness within which thoughts and emotions happen, and identifying with the field, that is really both the process of meditation, the practice of meditation, and the end result. And I think what's so fascinating is the mind is always involved in what we call those three aspects of our lives, being the watcher, watching something, and the process of watching. And in meditation, those three aspects is almost a vector: here, there, and the space within. That's our 3D world. But when we meditate, we go beyond the 3D world, and with the watcher, the experience of watching, and that which is watched merge. And people describe that state of, I'm no longer perceiving anything. I'm just at one with the moment. I'm at one with my environment at a physical level. I'm at one with the environment at a time level. So time has stopped. And I am just in pure being, yes, pure awareness. And I really would love for people to not have that as an expectation, because then we think, oh, the meditation is not working somehow, or how am I supposed to get to this state? What we're describing might happen in a millisecond, or it might be 10 years, or it doesn't matter. We just commit to that process of meditation, knowing it is really good for us, and let go of the expectations or what other people are experiencing, and just enjoy being in the moment.
Absolutely. And I'm fascinated with what you were saying as well about the space between, a bit earlier, we were talking about the spaces, I mean, I think Eckhart Tolle talks about the expansion of the spaces between thoughts, but I'm thinking here as well of the neuroscience around peripheral awareness and what that does to the brain when we actually physiologically open the visual field and open the somatic sensing, how that has the effect of actually stilling the mind, which is extraordinary. It tends to quieten it down, and how that space between is really accessible at a simple level. And I'm very struck by the parallels between some of the things that happen when you get into those kind of neuroplasticity dimensions, the neuroplastic experimentation with living from a peripheral expansion, for example, and the experiential similarity of that with meditative states where you actually are just awareness and you are the field. It seems that they approach very closely, and I'd be really intrigued to reflect on whether there's actually any distinction there. Part of me wants to say, yes, of course there is, because on the one hand, you're just talking about how the brain works, and on the other hand, you're talking about something more ultimate, something more profound. You're talking about universal consciousness and how it emerges into the awareness of an individual and that sort of thing. And on the other hand, of course, it's going to come through the hardware of the human brain anyway. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Wow, Anna, we're getting deep now, and there'll be different views on this as well. So for me, if you're going to ask my personal views on this, I'm a consciousness first person. So there are two kind of ways of looking at this, that we have this material existence around us, and atoms form cells, cells form molecules, molecules form brain cells, form neurons, which then form consciousness. And consciousness is an accidental byproduct of the physical environment or the physical hardware that exists. Or there's another way of looking at it, which is that consciousness comes first, and being alive by definition is being conscious, and that the brain is simply a focal hardware space for that consciousness to exist. Now, let's take a modern example of ChatGPT, which a lot of us are using right now. For those people who don't know, is the most kind of modern and up-to-date AI generator, as it were. Now, that AI is essentially a bunch of zeros and ones from a mechanical perspective, and is just stored in a piece of hardware. So you can call it that's the hardware there. But the software is then the ability of the AI to become more and more aware and learn more and more and become more and more what we might perceive as conscious. And therefore, I believe that it's distinguishing consciousness from the brain itself. The brain, when we observe brain scans and brain signals, it's a very imperfect way of trying to understand what the consciousness is actually experiencing or actually doing. And I believe that we'll never be able to actually do that just by looking at the pure neurons and the pure hardware. That is a subjective experience of being alive and being awake. And therefore, when we're meditating, what that is doing is that is having an effect on our consciousness. Our consciousness is experiencing the meditation. And as a secondary byproduct, we then see the effect it has within brain scans and within the brain itself. And what I find really fascinating is that they've detected something called the default mode network, which is this sense of when the brain isn't actively thinking about anything in particular, but we let our brain just daydream. And then that's the opportunity for the unconscious things to come up gently, and we're able to just think about nothing. Like when we're driving and our mind is wandering, we're not even thinking about driving. That period of time is really restful for the brain, and it needs spaces like that. But what happens is when people have anxiety, the default mode network is disrupted by that anxiety. So they never rest their brain, because the moment they have a space, all the anxieties come up. Or another aspect is when we are attempting to daydream and do nothing, we reach for our devices and our phones to engage us, which never allows the brain to rest. So on your point there, I think there's one really important aspect to meditation, which is by deliberately doing that each day, we allow the brain some rest that it's now not getting from being in the default mode network, which is our just daydream state. And secondly, the insightful impact that it trains our consciousness to be less reactive to those unconscious patterns is incredibly powerful as well. So it's reducing the reactivity of a brain structure called the amygdala. It's making our emotions less able to emotionally hijack us, through the process of meditation. So it's calming. And it's then creating conscious insights into who I really am, why I think the way I do, because we are no longer identified with that ball of turmoil that is the mind. And then those later stages are, once we recognize we are not the mind, we then say, well, who am I? That's when we start getting into this idea of not really having an identity at all, but being at one with existence itself, as a kind of third stage.
Yeah. And one of the things I experience quite frequently in meditation is being the awareness, but then the experience, and it's almost somatic how it arrives, that everything is awareness. And so it's as if everything in the space is also aware. And when one inquires in it, non-cognitively, just sort of feeling into it, there's no limit to it. It's boundless. It's a kind of endless extension of this awareness. But coming back to what you were saying before about the basic choice between consciousness first or materiality first, what intrigues me is how the best contemporary science and philosophy is moving increasingly towards the direction of materiality as an emerging expression, a kind of materialization of something that is not an idealized kind of flat consciousness, but that intelligent information and awareness itself makes up reality. That there is, I think I'm right in saying that some of the new physics is clearly pointing to what many people would say is a conscious universe. And this is, it's fantastic to sort of think about this in terms of how then we can imagine that in these practices, we're actually aligning with a much more profound level of reality itself, which I think at the level of nervous system function is almost like a profound hypnotic suggestion that enables the person to relax, because the little self absolutely doesn't have to be in control. When we know that there's a great flow of intelligent, aware life that we're part of, that we express that, when we get out of the way, that's when things really start to blossom and unfold in truly wonderful ways.
Yes, really well put, Anna. I agree. And I think the core of this is fear. Yeah. Fear and love are that primary scale within which all other emotions then trickle out. And every tradition talks of love, every religion, every spiritual tradition talks of love, and that primary scale is love and fear. As we move more towards fear, or past fears which are unresolved, we feel like this lonely object floating in this vast universe. And when we identify with ourselves in that way, then fear comes up. We feel separate to the world around us. And we feel like life is a struggle to try and just figure stuff out and get ahead and just survive. And that's what then, so then meditation becomes even more important for those people. People who are most anxious will tell me, Ashok, I can't meditate. It's too much. So if you could meditate easily on the very first day, you probably don't need to meditate, right? The whole point is meditation is something which is even more beneficial for those who find it hard. And therefore, we are looking at moving along that primary scale, away from our identification as this small object floating in this massive, lonely universe, to recognizing that those fears are things that have been generated by the mind, that we can just observe them and not identify with them. And then we start moving along the scale as we start surrendering to the universe. And each tradition will have its own way of defining that. They'll say surrendering to God, connecting with love, becoming your authentic self, however you want to describe it. It's moving away from this identity with a fearful mind. And it is fear that is our primary barrier to that. And as we let go of our fears and our anxieties and start surrendering, I think the number one perspective that helps us is that trust in that higher power, however we want to describe it. And I have many atheists using our program, and we say, do you believe in love? You can surrender to love. That's something we all agree on, regardless of our backgrounds. That is a universal human truth. When we feel that no matter what happens, we are being taken care of, right? Even if we so-called die and the physical body dies, this whole thing is a game that we're being allowed to play, and we are being taken care of. And the moment we're able to get to that, we then experience a sense of just letting go, of faith, of surrender, and it becomes easier to meditate.
Surrender is a wonderful, absolutely wonderful word for it. And of course, this ties up, doesn't it, with the power of the loving kindness type meditative practices, which deliberately open awareness to connectivity, to relationality, to the connection between, I'm thinking here of Dan Siegel's Wheel of Awareness practice, where, towards the end, he starts looking at you like your nearest and dearest, and your neighbours and your neighbourhood, then your country, then the planet, then the universe. There's a sense of expanding awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. And that, of course, the loving kindness practices introduce love as a kind of habituated practice in the body, so that in the end we start to embody the energy of love. And what could be more healing, actually, than being an embodiment of the energy of love? And the tie-ups there with, even with vagal theory, with the social engagement system, that sense of looking beyond the separation, looking beyond the smallness, the close down, to expand, to open, to touch, to connect.
Yes, we're really pioneering at the Gupta Program now the idea of social healing, community healing, where you're not on your own trying to figure it out, but you've got a supportive community until you don't need it anymore. That is the point, right? So once you feel your natural sense of connection to oneness and the universe, you're less dependent on that. But for the moment, as people are just moving along this journey, on this scale, having that supportive community is so powerful and really supports people, I think, with their healing. And I think this idea of connecting with love, we found the most important first step is that self-love. Because many people who've experienced chronic illness or fatigue, they've often had traumatic childhoods. They've often had periods of right through from a lack of nurture to full-blown abuse or trauma. And anywhere along that scale, a child can experience this lack of nurture, a belief that I'm not worthy of love. And that's what then heightens our anxiety later in life as adults and makes us feel that we are this lonely person floating in this vast lonely universe. And so the first aspect is that reparenting, that sense of maybe I didn't have the love and nurture that I wanted or expected. Therefore, and my parents did whatever they could given their resources. And therefore, what can I do to support and heal myself? And the first starting point is that self-love, that self-appreciation, that sense of self-worth. We rely on the outside, but it can never fill that gap. It's only ourselves that can actually heal that. And they say, in fact, at some level, all love is a form of self-love when we expand the definition of self. Yeah.
But absolutely. And also I find as well with clients who can't access that easily, sometimes the way to do it is through relationality. They can imagine and remember maybe a dog that they loved completely. And that's a very unthreatening thing, because obviously dissociation and running away from human connection is a key defense mechanism. If you feel that your primary, before you're even kind of cognitively able to process it, if your primary caregivers feel dangerous to you, then dissociation is a very natural tactic, as is getting very still, as is making minimal demands, not reaching out. Where would the trust be and everything? And sometimes people are so locked in that it's really interesting how it's creaturely continuity with a beautiful animal that can sometimes then be turned towards the self, so that they then begin to experience what it is to touch themselves with gentle sort of sacred awareness and allow self-love to grow. Again, it comes back to that interconnectedness of the self, the self is intrinsically not one thing. It's not an enclosed thing. We're not a black box. We're an open, porous system entangled in multiple systems of relationality, toxins, health-giving properties, and all the rest of it. And for me, that's I find that the invitation to people to sometimes to touch something very uncomplicated, like a simple love for a dog that doesn't come freighted with all the complexity of human relationships, can be the key to that, as you say, that vital self-love, which then becomes the fount of everything else that they go on to do.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, that aspect of community healing, or healing through someone that you know loves you, because the mind will ask, if you don't love me, how can I love me? Right? And then, as you say, whether it's a pet, or it can be someone else in our life, a person, a friend or a family member who we feel that kind of unconditional love towards us, that can be so therapeutic and healing, because we say, okay, that person loves me, therefore I am lovable, therefore I can appreciate and love who I am. And pets are, as we know, the most unconditionally loving beings on the planet, probably. And so I think that can be powerful. I think also teachers, there may be enlightened beings or more enlightened beings who we feel a sense of connection and trust to, who we feel loved and supported by, without any ill intentions towards us or anything they're trying to gain from us, which also can create a sense of unconditionality, unconditional love that we may feel. And that can be a healing space for this to grow within us. And once that then embeds itself within ourselves and we recognize it just not so much intellectually, but as an embodied wisdom, then it becomes easier to let go of the fears and then go along that journey towards love away from fear, and actually have that sense of trust and faith in the universe. And then the meditation isn't filled full of anxieties and worries, because we're less identified with the mind. And I think in Eastern thought, there is this idea of the Sanskrit word being viveka, which is this discrimination between what is real and what is unreal, and recognizing that our childhood and what we learnt, all of those things we learnt isn't real in an objective sense. It's a conditioning process that we went through. And therefore, we were able to discriminate and realize, well, that actually isn't the truth. It's not the reality. That's what I just learnt. And I can unlearn that and recognize that actually I'm swimming in an ocean of love. I may not experience it right now, but I can take that perspective. There are many loving people around me. We've all experienced love in some shape or form. And if I take that as the default state of the universe, then I can let go of my fears and move towards the light.
Yeah, I love this idea of, I was talking with a friend recently about the ultimate ontological primacy of love as kind of the ultimate reality. And I think even if that were not true, believing it would be an incredibly healing move.
Exactly. People say, well, hang on, how do I know this is all true? And we spend a lifetime just questioning what is the truth, waiting for science to prove consciousness or love in some way. There will never be an equation for consciousness. There will never be an equation for love. It's a subjective experience. And what can you think of a better way to live? So from a purely practical perspective, let go of belief and say, if I were to live in a state of just having that trust and faith in love, what difference would that make to my physiology, my health, my ability to connect with people around me? It would be so beneficial.
And for them.
Yeah.
And for them, because obviously energetically and in terms of our nervous system state, we either co-regulate or dysregulate the people around us. We're connected to them. And, I'm sure you've come across it. I have. I've been in the presence of really wonderful, very evolved spiritual practitioners or teachers, and their energy alone, just being in their presence, their vibe itself affects everyone around them. So the more that we embody love, it's not just great for our physiology, it's great for the physiology of those we're close to, and sometimes those we're not close to, people we come across in the shops, the way we might just speak to the bus driver. There's a kind of, constant ripple effect of all our kind of relational interactions in that sense. So in a sense, this is one of the things I say to people about I draw a distinction between recovery and healing in the work I do, Ashok, because to me, an obsession with recovery can become counterproductive if it comes from a sense of lack. And it can almost become a quasi-hypnotic suggestion where, then a kind of desperation starts to dominate one's kind of energetic practice. Whereas when we think of healing, to me, that invites a kind of lifelong thing. It's a process. I could heal even if I was bedbound. I could be doing deep, deep inner healing work bedbound. And if that healing work encompasses as well the healing of my consciousness, if I'm actually evolving spiritually in that context, then I'm doing collective work. I'm reaching out beyond where I am because of the nature of consciousness itself and the way that everything's universally connected. That gives me a sense of purpose. Equally, I've known many fit and healthy people who I would describe as unhealed. So I think there's something really important there in the nuance here. And it seems to me that meditation is a profound training tool for precisely those deeper journeys that you've been describing, confronting the pain of adverse childhood experiences and old trauma, things like that. That those sort of things really start to open, I think, when we think about practices of healing. And I love your use of the term social healing, because for me, one of my political kind of diatribes is the individualization of fatigue, the way that individuals are kind of told they're fatigued and they need to sort themselves out individually. There's truth in that, but collectively, planetarily, ecologically, we're looking at fatigue because of the messed up way that we live, our structures, our priorities, our economics, our politics, our commitments, particularly in the global north and the Western mindset, extremely damaging. And I feel that our community, Ashok, are like canaries in the mine for a wider society, and likewise pioneers of a kind of inner adventuring, a learning of the technologies of the self, a learning of technologies of relationality and expansion, but also hold out hope for other people.
This is so important, what you're describing, the powerful effects of group healing and community healing. And, when we meditate together with others, if they're all with the same intention, it can be so much more powerful than ourselves meditating on our own. And so it does start at those three stages. We're meditating for ourselves, we're meditating for the people around us, the people we know, and for the people we don't know, the entire healing of the planet. And on that note, there is a new project we've just launched, which will be launching, I think, by the time this podcast comes out, which is daily Guptacise. Now, what that is it's a daily healing guided meditation, which is guided by myself or one of our coaches, which has that intentionality there, that we're here to heal ourselves, the people around us, and the entire planet. And that will be guided every day live on Zoom. So it won't just be something where you're just streaming it, but you can actually come on Zoom, see all the meditators around you, the hundreds of people, and feel like you're part of a collective and intentional healing community. And that is really where we want to bring together people who want to heal or are healers themselves. And that gives them a space and a platform to share that gift with all the people who are looking to be healed. And it will all be, together on a Zoom call. So that's something that we're launching very soon. And that's free to the planet. So that is just downloading our app and having that daily Guptacise.
That sounds really beautiful. And I'd love you to send me a link later so I can put it on the podcast notes for people so they can dive into that. It kind of reminds me of the kind of global coherence initiative. I think it's connected with the HeartMath Institute, where everyone kind of does coherence breathing at the same time. And there's some implication that people coming into coherence hits kind of the Schumann resonance and kind of does something in the earth field. I don't know enough about it, but I've kind of picked that up. And I think kind of the awareness of our planetary connection is becoming ever more important at a whole series of levels. So I think that's a really beautiful initiative, Ashok, and I think people will be really pleased to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you. And initial focus will be healing, and then we'll see where this takes us. So we're experimenting for a month, and then we'll expand it in different directions.
Yeah, lovely. Ashok, I've really enjoyed this conversation so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful to be here.
And thank you for coming on. And I'm sure people have got stuff out of it. I'll put links to your work so that people can follow you up. I'm sure a lot of my audience are already familiar with what you do, and maybe some of them have even been on your program. But just terrific to explore these nuances around meditation, healing, consciousness, and materiality. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.